What's going on, folks? It is Billiam from Everberon, and today I'm back to talk a little bit more about Elden Ring lore. Today's discussion is going to be focused largely around the potential origins of the Empyreans as well as the Shadows. And the reason that I'm making this video is that I believe that there might be some misinterpretation in the larger Elden Ring lore scene as a whole. I want to clarify right away that I don't necessarily believe that this means that everyone who's making a lore video on the Empyreans is wrong, as Elden Ring lore is very subjective, and that may be the only real truth of the game at all. However, I thought it would make sense to at least put my take out there so that people can critique it or tell me what they think. Before I get started, I do have a Discord server. I've mentioned it before, and I'll probably mention it again. Since the success of my Deathbirds lore video, a lot of people have joined the Discord and started joining in the lore discussions there. We have a lot of fun, and I really do care about what you guys have to say, so feel free to join it. Link is in description. In addition, and I'll say this again at the end, I really am interested in seeing what you guys think about this take, so let me know in the comments, and yeah. I am going to be doing some theorizing in this video, as is the nature of Elden Ring lore and discussion, but I'll try and put a formal theory warning whenever I say something that is directly not backed up by text. Once again, I know that I put a disclaimer at the beginning of this video, but nothing that I say here is to be taken as gospel. In addition, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the first person to come to the conclusions that I'm going to draw today. There's a really great video that's about 2 months old by a YouTube creator called Creepling, who makes a lot of the same points that I'm going to make here, and actually elaborates on some aspects of the Empyreans which I'm not going to talk about here. His video is going to be linked in description. I think it's a really good one. I think he presents himself well, and it's just a lot of fun to watch. As a whole, I'm seeing that the Elden Ring community is becoming more and more open to the points that I'm about to make, and a lot of people are just finding this evidence for themselves, too. The purpose of this video is to use evidence to clarify my stance on the origins of the Empyreans and the Shadows, and in addition, I want to present some theories that I think have a little bit of merit. I suppose that the first thing that we need to do is define what exactly an Empyrean and a Shadow are with respect to the game. The two are very closely intertwined, as you'll soon see, so for now we're going to begin with Empyrean. In real-world lexicology, the word Empyrean is used to describe the perfect state of being. Merriam-Webster Dictionary describes the word Empyrean as the highest heaven or heavenly sphere in ancient and medieval cosmology, usually consisting of fire or light, the true and ultimate heavenly paradise, and finally, an ideal place or state. So in our world, the word Empyrean is essentially interchangeable with the term heaven. With respect to Elden Ring, the term Empyrean is actually used to describe not a place, but a being, or rather a collection of beings. The particular Empyreans that we know of in-game are Miquella, Malenia, and Ranni the Witch. Now, you may be asking yourself, what constitutes an Empyrean as distinct from any other life form in the lands between? As it happens, the definition of what makes something or someone an Empyrean is the first thing that I generally disagree with. There is, or at least was, a general consensus that the defining factor of an Empyrean was one who was born of a single god. And I believe that the reason that people go with this assumption is because of a line from the Remembrance of the Rot Goddess, the Rot Goddess being Malenia. I'm going to read the Remembrance verbatim and then we'll discuss. Remembrance of Malenia, Goddess of Rot, hewn into the Erd Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Miquella and Malenia are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but suffered afflictions from birth. One was cursed with eternal childhood, and the other harbored rot within. Obviously, the last line of the Remembrance is the most important for our purposes today, as it reads, once again, Miquella and Malenia are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans. Admittedly, this does seem very straightforward, and what's more, the idea that the Empyreans are born of a single god does meld well with the real-world definition which I mentioned earlier, especially in terms of perfection or the perfect state of being. After all, it's harder to get closer to godhood than literally being the child of a god. So in short, I don't really fault anyone for not pondering the definition any further than this. My definition in and of itself doesn't make a ton of sense unless we take a look at some dialogue which Ranni reveals to us during the course of her questline.
Let us speak of the past a while. I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Miquella, and Malenia could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own two fingers as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age.
I think the best way to examine this dialogue is to do it one line at a time, so that's what I'm gonna do. Ranni tells us that she was once an Empyrean, which is something that we already know. However, take particular care to pay attention to the phrasing of this. I was once an Empyrean, meaning she is no longer an Empyrean. The reason that this is true for Ranni in particular has to do with a portion of her past, wherein she slew her organic body in order to escape the preordained path which the Greater Will and the Two Fingers had in store for her soul then inhabiting the doll that we see her in-game. Now, I know that's a lot of information to assimilate, but Ranni's story really deserves its own video, so for now I'm gonna kinda leave it there. But regardless, what's important for today's purposes is that we know, because of the dialogue that states Ranni is no longer an Empyrean, that somewhere in the process of slaying herself and inhabiting the doll, the quality which inherently makes her an Empyrean was somehow lost. If the definition of the term Empyrean truly is that a character was born of a single god, then how can somebody no longer be an Empyrean? An Empyrean would, by the widely accepted definition, be a position which one has to be born into, and cannot then get out of. Kind of like being an omen. It's not as if you can change your lineage after birth. And one would imagine that this would remain true regardless of the body which Ranni's soul inhabited. The next line revealed to us that of the demigods, only Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia could claim that title, the title of Empyrean. The thing I'd like to bring up here is that of the characters mentioned, Ranni is the only one who is not born of one god, so to speak. We were already told that Malenia and Miquella were, and in fact they were born of Radagon and Marika's union, which I'm not going to get into the whole Radagon is Marika thing, but that pretty much explains how somebody can be born of one god. Malenia's Great Rune, as well as the Discus of Light and the Triple Rings of Light, all bring up a little bit more evidence in detail with regards to Miquella and Malenia's birth, but I'm not going to dwell on it too much, as we've already established the point there. Ranni, however, was not born to Radagon and Marika. Instead, she was born in the union between Radagon and Rennala. This is explicitly told to us by Sorcerer Rogier after he appears at the Round Table Hold, where he says the following.
The person who orchestrated the Night of the Black Knives, Lunar Princess Ranni, one of the children born to King Consort Radagon and his first wife, Rennala.
Cycling back to what Ranni says during the course of her quest, the words of Roger, serve as pretty damning evidence that Empyreanhood cannot be connected to the circumstances of one's birth, at least as it pertains to being born of one god. I believe that the final line of Ranni's dialogue, which I wish to examine today, actually gives us the real criteria for what it means to be an Empyrean. Quote, each of us was chosen by our own two fingers as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age. What this means to me is that the real qualification for being an Empyrean is that the Two Fingers, and by extension the Greater Will, have chosen the subject as one of many who may usurp the god of the current age and become the god of the next age. This makes no mention of birth prerequisites of any sort. In fact, it doesn't even seem to suggest that godhood of any kind is needed to partake in this process in the first place, theoretically. After all, Ranni does say, of the demigods. Only I, Miquella, and Malenia could claim that title, which to me suggests the possibility that even those without godly blood of any sort could, in theory, still be considered for the position of Empyrean, if the Two Fingers and by extension the Greater Will hand down the verdict that it is to be so. Now, I know what some people are probably thinking. If this is in fact the case, then why does the remembrance of the Rot Goddess seem to suggest perhaps the opposite of what I've been saying this whole time? And once again, I would argue that I believe this is something of a misconception. Hopefully, even if you disagree with what I'm about to propose, you can still understand where I'm coming from. Allow me to explain. To fully understand what's going on here, I think that we have to look to Finger Reader Enya in the Round Table Hold. Specifically what she and, allegedly, the Two Fingers have to say with regards to the subject of Great Runes.
Great runes are the stuff of demigods, the children of the goddess, Queen Marika, she who is vessel of the Elden Ring. Tainted by the strength of their runes, her children warred, but none could become Elden Lord. And so grace was extended to your kind, the tarnished. Listen, the fingers speak. The Greater Will has long renounced the demigods. Tarnished, show no mercy. Have their heads. Take all they have left.
According to Enya and the Two Fingers, the Greater Will has renounced the demigods, meaning it has refused to recognize them and their lineage. This is, of course, due to what happened during the Shattering and, all that. Basically, what's important is that the Greater Will clearly disapproves of the way that the Lands Between were being handled by Marika and her kin, and thus has renounced them. Hence why the Tarnished are led back to the Lands Between so that they may help the Greater Will in hopefully reclaiming its hold over the land and restoring order which the Greater Will was trying to uphold. Now let's consider that the Greater Will is the same being which, through the Two Fingers, chooses the Empyreans. It's clear that before Marika fell out of favor with the Greater Will, she was chosen as the god of the current age. Marika was once an Empyrean herself, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but for now, considering that the Greater Will chose her to lead the Lands Between and be the god of the current age, the Greater Will believed that Marika was the right fit, and as such it would make sense that her children were immediately put forth to become Empyreans and potentially continue the lineage into the next age. And finally, this justifies the matter-of-factness exhibited in the remembrance of the Rot Goddess. This also tells us why the Empyreans were eventually renounced, because they were connected to the current gods. To conclude this section, I believe that this is some of the evidence which a lot of people who speculate on the lore in the community right now are missing. If the only quota for an Empyrean was to be born of a single god, i.e. Marika and Radagon, then that would suggest that Ranni was not in fact born of Radagon and Rennala, as we know to be true. Although we, the player, may not completely understand the metaphysics behind Ranni losing her Empyreanhood by transferring her soul to the doll, it's absurd to suggest that Ranni herself doesn't know what makes her an Empyrean. And moreover, the rest of the questline dialogue that we've looked over today would make no sense. One last point that I want to explore briefly is the idea that perhaps the Greater Will isn't the only outer god which can officiate the process of creating or dubbing an Empyrean. We have no proof to suggest that any other outer gods have done this in-game, but I thought that the idea was interesting enough that maybe it's worth leaving out there to ruminate with the audience. Alright, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can finally talk about the shadows. And in the process, I can elaborate more on why Marika was once herself an Empyrean, even though I think at this point it seems pretty obvious. In the most concise terms that come to mind, shadows are basically personalized bodyguards and servants of the Empyreans. Their general duties may include defending the Empyrean in question, fighting on the Empyrean's behalf, and the like, all in the name of helping their respective Empyrean potentially reach the status of godhood. Although the general duties varied from shadow to shadow, and Empyreans used their shadows for a whole slew of activities outside of combat. The two shadows who you'll probably be immediately familiar with from your time in-game are Maliketh the Black Blaidd and Blaidd the Half-Wolf. Maliketh was the shadow to Marika while she was an Empyrean, and Blaidd was the shadow to Ranni. Both of these characters are very different, and it helps to examine each of their natures respectively. The Remembrance of the Black Blaidd offers us a lot of insight into the relationship between Marika and Maliketh. It reads as follows. Remembrance of Maliketh, the Black Blaidd, hewn into the Erd Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the Finger Reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. Maliketh was a shadow-bound beast given to his Empyrean. Marika's sole need for her shadow was a vessel to lock away destined death. Even then, she betrayed him. There's a certain air within this text of the shadows, specifically Maliketh, being treated as objects and not as living beings. Although the shadows held great power, they were ultimately slaves to their masters. And this is made no more apparent than by the cruelty that Marika exhibited when subjecting Maliketh to be the one to seal away the Rune of Death. We even receive evidence that deep down Maliketh was not complacent with this arrangement, particularly when it is said that Marika's sole need for her shadow was a vessel to lock away destined death, and that even then she betrayed him. I believe that this alludes to the corrupting power of the Rune of Death. Many years later, when Ranni stole a portion of the Rune of Death, and its pieces were eventually used to kill Godwyn the Golden, we know that death itself had a corrupting effect, on Godwyn in particular. The Prince of Death's cyst reads, in part, "It is said that this cyst came from the corrupted visage of one unable to die a true death. Indeed, it comes from the Prince of Death, scion of the Golden Bough, and first of the dead among the demigods." I mean, honestly, that pretty much says it all right there. But what's more, we know that once the Rune of Death was broken and a part of it was taken from Maliketh, he developed an insatiable hunger to have it returned. Geraint, the beast clergyman, is an alter ego of Malekith. We know this because this is the name which Malekith assumes before revealing himself during his fight in Farum Azula. Geraint, however, can also be encountered in the Bestial Sanctum, at the northernmost shore of Dragonborough. Here you can offer the starving beast clergyman death roots, items gained from inside particular mini-dungeons throughout the map, and the description of which reads, "A source that gives rise to those who live in death. The beast clergyman found at Bestial Sanctum in the distant east collects and devours these roots. On the night of the dire plot, the stolen Rune of Death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the Rune of Death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the great tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot." This seems to suggest that the small portion of the Rune of Death which was stolen and used to forge weapons such as the Black Knives also managed to somehow permeate and corrupt the roots of the great tree, and thus when collecting a small piece of Deathroot and feeding it to Geraint, you're really replacing an infinitely small shard of the Rune of Death. You're, in essence, making Malekith whole again, little by little. It's actually been suggested that the reason that Malekith takes up his refuge in Farum Azula is so that he can be as far away as possible from the rest of the civilized world in the lands between. We know that Malekith is prone to fits of rage where he may attack due to his insatiable hunger, and it is undeniable that existence for Malekith must be excruciating. Do note that the concept of a shadow being considered disposable, or perhaps disregarding the individuality of the shadows, was not a treatment unique to Marika and Malekith's dynamic. Even Ranni and Blaidd seem to have a less extreme version of the same thing going on. We get insight into this through Blaidd's armor set, of which Blaidd's gauntlets and Blaidd's greaves read, "Blaidd, who served as Ranni's shadow, was a loyal ally who would defy destiny itself if it would have him turn upon his lady." However, in the description of Blaidd's armor, it says, "The pelt serves as a cape protecting from cold. Blaidd was the blade of Ranni, but the cold bothered him anyway." Aside from sounding like a reference to Disney's Frozen, we can see that beneath Blaidd's perceived stoicism, he still possessed needs for warmth or for whatever else, which went ignored, and considering Blaidd's character, I believe that this is exactly what he wanted. We know that Blaidd has held a steadfast commitment to Ranni even after she was renounced as an Empyrean, something which comes directly from Ranni's own mouth. But ultimately, this is not a new trope within fiction, to have a character who is steadfastly devoted to another, ignoring even their own wants and needs in the name of service towards someone they see as fit. And make no mistake, Blaidd is no longer beholden to Ranni in any fashion, yet he stays with her because he wants to. A slightly sad yet endearing aspect of these characters. Alright, I'm almost done with the video, but before I go, I wanted to talk about the nature of all of the shadows being wolves of some sort, and present a theory for you guys to debate in the comments if you want. So, there's a character in-game called Vangram the Raging Wolf, and each piece of the armor which is associated with this character, spare the helm, reads as follows. Armor, gauntlets, or greaves worn by Vangram the Raging Wolf, one of the first Tarnished to visit the Round Table Hold. According to the old legends, wolves are the shadows of the Empyrean. Vangram aspired to such a state himself. So right off the bat, make no mistake, Vangram is a Tarnished. He is not a half-wolf, he is not a shadow, he's just a guy. Man just really wants to be a wolf. No, but jokes aside, what's important here is that it states that the wolves are shadows of the Empyrean. Now, I checked every other piece of dialogue in the game that includes the word wolf or wolves, and got no other mention of just straight wolves being the shadows to the Empyreans. I believe that what the text is trying to say is that the shadows aren't literally just wolves, but rather creatures which bear wolfen resemblance. Blaidd is a perfect example, and I imagine Malekith must look similar under his armor. So what exactly are these half-wolf beings? They don't seem to appear anywhere else in the game, but I've got a theory here that I want you guys to consider. Come to think of it, it's actually kind of two theories, but I'm just going to present them. Let me know what you think. The first is that the Bloodhound Knights may be this same species. I don't believe that the Bloodhound Knights are shadows of any Empyreans because of the way in which they seem to find a master. The ashes of Bloodhound Knight Flow say, "Ashen remains in which spirits yet dwell. Used to summon the spirit of Flow, the Bloodhound Knight. Spirit of a Bloodhound Knight they called the Rabid Stray. Will attack without pause immediately after being summoned. Flow vowed that there was only one lord he would ever serve, a true king. And so, the Rabid Stray never found a master." And furthermore, the Bloodhound Knight helm reads, "Metal helm with a pointed beak. worn by the Bloodhound Knights. The Bloodhound Knights are trained as hunters and known to be unshakable trackers. Without the use of language, each knight chooses his own master. Once the decision has been made, the knight stays loyal for life. Certainly this sort of loyalty shares many resemblances with the shadow process that we've seen, but considering that the Bloodhound Knights choose their own masters, and they are not given to them by the Greater Will, I don't think that any of these guys actually were shadows. Maybe they were like shadow rejects or something. The reason that I think that the Bloodhound Knights are even related in the first place is because they share similar movements to Malekith, and exhibit bestial tendencies, which we don't really see anywhere else in game. Of course, we can't see under their armor, so there's really no way to know for sure, I suppose. Also, interestingly, and I'm not really sure if this counts against or for the theory, but we are told that the Bloodhound Knights are unable to speak, which is not true for Blaidd or Malekith. Another potential connection which I didn't put together until after editing this video is Bloodhound Knight Darrowil, who Blaidd is looking for in the beginning of the game, and who you can eventually locate in an Everjail just outside of the Weeping Peninsula. If you engage in Darrowil's fight after having spoken to Blaidd previously at the Mistwood Ruins, you'll have the option to summon him for assistance during the battle, where he'll make remarks which hint at the two having known one another previously. Obviously, this isn't surefire proof that Darrowil the Bloodhound Knight is necessarily the same species as Blaidd, but considering that they have some unexplained backstory and history together, it does certainly lend credence to the idea. Let me know what you make of that too. The second part of this theory, or maybe the second theory itself, depending on how you look at it, is that the half-wolf-like creatures that make up the ranks of the Shadows may in fact be beastmen from Farum Azula. This theory is even more of a stretch than the last one, and that's saying something. They are both vaguely wolf-like humanoids with bestial fur, and the beastmen exist in a similar vicinity to Malekith. What's more, all throughout Farum Azula you can find these beastmen which seem to be strung up on these pillars of some sort, and wouldn't you know it, these effigies are also present in the Bestial Sanctum, home of Geraint, aka Malekith. I think there might be some interesting byproducts of this theory though, especially if we consider the way in which time functions, specifically in Farum Azula. All of the beastmen there are, like, on the brink of death. They're all rotting, even though they're still alive. They have mangy fur, and it seems that their faces are missing skin entirely, perhaps even being cut down to the bone. It's interesting to suggest that a healthy beastman may look more similar to Blaidd. Imagine if there was a bunch of Blaidds running around Farum Azula. That'd be kinda cool. Right, guys? Right? Wouldn't that be cool? It would raise questions with regards to the size disparity between specifically Malekith and the beastmen, though. Perhaps the Rune of Death caused him to grow in an unholy way. I don't really know. I don't necessarily think that my theories with regards to the Bloodhound Knights nor the Beastmen are true, but I think they provide something interesting to chew on. And I think that's going to do it for my analysis of the Empyreans and the Shadows. Hopefully you thought that my take on the lore was interesting and could see where I was coming from, even if you don't agree. Please let me know in the comments why you disagree, or what you think was interesting about this video in particular. Like I said in the Deathbirds video, I never ask you guys to comment just to raise the video up in the algorithm or something. I legitimately want to hear what you have to say. You can also join our Discord, like I talked about at the beginning of the video. Link is in description for that. We've got a very tight-knit, very respectful community over there where everyone's interested to hear each other's ideas about the lore. I spend a lot of my free time in there when I'm not making videos, so come chat with us. Other than that, you can check out my live stream channel, that's also linked in description. I frequently play Elden Ring, and hopefully you guys will look forward to that. Furthermore, I've got some socials linked in description as well that you're free to check out. I'm most active on my Twitter, but I try and engage with all of the platforms at least a little bit. Finally, a big thank you to GR Sensual on YouTube for allowing me to use the footage of the Bloodhound Knight boss battle. This was the only footage I didn't get myself, but if you're interested in helping me source footage so I can make these videos a little faster, that's something we also do in the Discord. Anyway, I think that's gonna do it. Thank you guys for watching this far. If you've made it to this point in the video, I do appreciate it. This is Billiam from Everberon, and I'll see you guys again soon with some more Elden Ring lore. Have a good one.